Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? This is fantastic. Welcome to Vanderbilt on such a happy occasion. Graduation is my favorite day of the year. It beats Christmas. It beats the first day of class. It even beats the last day of class. So graduation is a wonderful time. I'm Sandra Rosenthal. I'm a professor in the chemistry department. How many former students in the audience? A few. Okay. I actually was on maternity leave in 2005. So I typically teach freshman chemistry in the spring, and I teach physical chemistry to the juniors in the fall. And I was on maternity leave in 2005, so I think there's fewer students that are here. I was told to do this as sort of a snippet of what I do in the classroom. So one of the things I do in the classroom is I always play music before class to get psyched up and to get the audience loosened up. And the second thing that I do in class is we use technology to do audience participation. And we're going to do that in a second. The title of today's talk, what we're going to talk about today, concerns nanotechnology. And before I explain what nanotechnology is, I want to motivate it with a question. So for those of you that got the clickers, we're going to do a couple of clicker questions. Well, that's the audio. There we go.
I'm right here.
And there we go. So I've posed a question here, which is a little covered up, but it is, which of the answers below most closely reflects what you think about global climate change? So take a minute to read the questions and key in your response, and the instructions for using the clicker are up here on the front. And when you've answered, when you've actually point your clicker at the podium, and when you've actually responded, your clicker will tell you you've answered the following. So you want to point your clicker at the podium when you answer. Okay. I go to a countdown timer to put the pressure on. Okay, time's up. And there we go. This is a question that people might feel uncomfortable with raising their hands, and so the personal response technology allows people to say what they really think anonymously. We can also use this to take quizzes. There's a lot of different ways to use these personal response systems. So we've got half division, about half division here, that so everybody thinks we've got a global climate change problem. Half think it's linked to human activity and half don't. I can tell you where the students answer this question. The students answer this question all the way to the right, that global warming is a problem and that it's linked to human activity. I have a follow-up question. Who is the first person that postulated that human activity could lead to climate change? Okay, countdown timer. See what we get. Very smart. A very smart audience realizes that the instructor is a chemist. and so the answer 2 is indeed the correct answer. And I can tell you, going back to the last question, that most scientists do believe that global climate change is linked to human activity. And Arrhenius, I'm going to need a pointer. Arrhenius, who is famous for theory of chemical reactions, postulated at the turn of the last century that all of the pollutants that we're pumping into the atmosphere back in this time in England at the turn of the century could eventually cause a problem. How do I get rid of that inset? Where'd that come from? Although we're almost done. Richard Feynman plays a role in what we're going to talk about today. Richard Feynman is a physicist at Caltech, and he wrote this famous paper in 1958 that's called "That There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom." And Richard Feynman predicted back in 1958 many of the technologies that are being realized by nanotechnology today. So the link between what we're going to talk about today and these two questions that were motivated to get you thinking about global warming is that we've made a discovery here at Vanderbilt University that's related to nanotechnology, which, if it sees its full fruition, may be able to help abate global climate change. So let's talk about nano.
I will stand back here and push the button.
Okay. So next slide. Yeah, there we go. That's good. Nano is a length scale. Nano is a size scale. And so to get you calibrated, let's start with the size of a meter and go down by factors of 10. So like a Great Dane is about a meter tall. If you go down 2 orders of magnitude or a factor of 100, you get to a guppy, which is about a centimeter. And an ant might be, the head of an ant might be a millimeter in size. If we go down 2 more orders of magnitude, this is 10 microns. We get to the size of red blood cells. If we go to 1 micrometer, we get to the size of a bacteria. And to calibrate you, that little period on a printed page, 250,000 bacteria can fit into a period in a printed page. So that's already really small, but we're not yet in the nano size regime. We go down to 100 nanometers. This is the size of proteins. If we go down to 10 nanometers, this is the size of antibodies, and we go down to 1 nanometer, this is the size of molecules. And for those of you that studied your science a long time ago, one of the amazing discoveries that's happened that is enabling nanotechnology is that those are actual pictures of molecules. Those are the atoms in the molecule. We actually have microscopes now that are capable of seeing individual atoms. It's really amazing. So this scale down here, 100 nanometers to 1 nanometer, defines nano. And nanotechnologies has to do with things that are made on this length scale. And what's really fantastic about this length scale is that the properties of material change. So you get down below here, the materials don't have the same properties that they do on the larger scale. And one more way to think about how small is a nanometer. If you think about the distance between here and the sun, take the distance from here and the sun and then think about this distance. This distance is 1 nanometer on the length scale of the distance between the Earth and the sun. So we're talking really, really small. Go ahead. So President Clinton launched the National Nanotechnology Initiative back in 2000, and he actually launched it at Caltech, which is where Feynman was from. And I still remember the State of the Union address where he talked about this. My point of showing this slide is that nanotechnology has been a national priority since about 2000. The Bush administration continued to fund at increasing levels research in nanotechnology, and House Resolution 554 is before the Senate right now to continue increased funding for nanotechnology. It's up to a couple of billion a year from where it started at 500 million. Next slide. So I titled my talk today, The Promise of Nanotechnology, and here's a bunch of things that were listed in the original report for what nanotechnology can do. But to sum it all up, nanotechnology is going to impact every component of the economic sector. It's going to impact healthcare. It's going to impact the environment. It's going to impact energy. And two examples that I'm going to give you today have to do with the environment and have to do with medicine. Go ahead. So here's a type of nanotechnology that we're really, really good at Vanderbilt. And we do this in my research group, and it's in some other research groups on campus. And I also pick it because it's an example of how when you get down to the nanoscale, material has different properties. So we make something called a semiconductor nanocrystal. And it looks like this. This model contains about 1,000 atoms, and it represents a nanocrystal that is 6 nanometers in size. And what's really cool about these nanocrystals is that if you make them a different size, you get a different color. These are small ones that are about 2 nanometers in size, and then these are larger ones all the way to about 6 nanometers in size. This is all of the same material. It's all the same stuff. It's just a different size. And go ahead, click. So this is a prettier example of the same thing shown when you look at it by fluorescence. The red ones are large, and then the energy levels go to higher energy as the nanocrystals get smaller. And go ahead and click to the next slide. The reason of this is quantum mechanics. When you get down to this small size of material, quantum mechanics kicks in. And what's happening here is that the smaller I make the nanocrystal, the more I'm squeezing the positive and negative charge in the nanocrystal. And the more I squeeze it, the higher the energy goes. So you have these wonderful size-dependent optical properties. And this was discovered in '84 by a professor named Louis Bruce, who was at Bell Labs at the time. He went to Columbia. Anyway, he won the Kavli Prize last year. He won the Kavli Prize for nanotechnology. It's like the Nobel Prize for nanotechnology. It's a $1 million prize. So this was an important discovery. Go ahead. So do a little bit of chemistry here, but don't freak out. Don't freak out. It's just chemistry. If you can cook, okay? If you can cook, you can do chemistry. Honestly. If you can cook, you can do chemistry. The material we're talking about is cadmium selenide. So we need a source of cadmium. So this is cadmium oxide. And we need a source of selenium, which you complex with an organic molecule. So here's like the stove, right? So here's our pot. And here's the stove. This is a heating mantle that heats things up to a very high temperature. There's a stir bar, a little magnetic stir bar. So instead of having to stir all the time ourselves, we put it on an automatic stirrer. Sometimes when you cook, you need to know the temperature. This is a fancy thermometer that tells us the temperature. And we inject the cadmium and selenium reagents here into the soup. And at very high temperatures, they make nanocrystals. We drop the temperature a little bit, and they make the nanocrystals. You stop making little ones, but the little ones that you've made can grow. Go ahead. So these guys have been around since 1984. There was a really good synthesis published where you learned how to cook them really well in 1993. And the field has taken off. And one of the places that nanocrystals have made a large impact is in biomedical imaging and doing biomedics. And I'll show you why. You can make a type of nanocrystal that's very, very bright, essentially gives off all of the light that it absorbs. And this is one of two graphs that there's only two graphs in today's lecture, so bear with me as we go through this graph. This is 400 nanometers. The lines are color-coded here. 400 nanometers is blue light, and then you go through just like a rainbow to green, aqua, green, yellow, and red. 700 nanometers is red light. And I want you to remember this graph that from 400 to 700 nanometers, if you make these different sizes of nanocrystals, they emit distinct colors. They emit very narrow spectra that are distinct colors. So hit the next slide. So here's why they're good in biology. These tiny little crystals are small compared to the size of cells. We can make them so that they're incredibly bright. And if they're really bright, that might give you a new way for early detection of disease, and I'm going to show you an example. All of those different spectra, you can pick a different size and you get a different color. So if you want to look at a bunch of things at the same time, just pick 3 or 4 sizes and you can follow stuff at the same time. Also, because they're inorganic, they're not organic, they don't photobleach, which means that usually organic molecules, when you shine light on them, they eventually do chemistry and they degrade. These organic guys don't. They stay bright all the time, which means that you can make a movie. And I'll show you a movie. Go ahead. So this is work that was done by my colleague in chemistry, David Wright, and his colleague, Jim Crow, who is in pediatric infectious disease. They used this nanotechnology, they used these nanocrystals to come up with a new way for detecting respiratory syncytial virus earlier. So respiratory syncytial virus is a virus that young children can get. It's the highest cause for hospitalization in young children. And the reason that the kids have to be hospitalized is that the current test to do the analysis to see if it's respiratory syncytial virus takes 4 days. So the kid has to be in the hospital until they get the test results back saying, yes, this is respiratory syncytial virus. There's antiviral drugs for it, but they have to be given very early in the stage of infection to be effective. So a new way to detect it is important. And so what you've seen here, remember I said 4 days. It used to take 4 days to be able to figure out that there was infection. They took infected cells and used fluorescent quantum dots, and with 1 hour, because the dots are so bright, they could see the presence of infection. It was very, very clear after 1 day. It was clear after 2 days, and extremely clear after 3 days. So this is an example of a nanotechnology that has actually gone through clinic here at Vanderbilt. And so it's one example of how nanotechnology is going to impact medicine. Next slide. This is actually Jim Crow's kid. For those of you with a biomedical background, the way this would work is that an antibody would, so you take the snot from the kid, and you put it on a plate, and there's an antibody on the plate that recognizes the virus. And then can you there's a flash, hit the down key. And then you can come in with a secondary antibody that talks to a quantum dot that lights it up. You could also imagine, this is just one size that I showed you, but you could imagine using a blue dot, a green dot, a yellow dot, a red dot to see what type of flu somebody has. Next slide. And could you activate that movie? So. Just press on that. Yeah, these are images of neurons, and these are quantum dots that are talking to the serotonin transporter protein. The serotonin transporter protein is the site of action of all the serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors like Prozac and Paxil. Can you play that movie one more time? This shows, because the quantum dots don't bleach, we can make movies, and we can follow what the protein is doing on the surface of the neurons. And this is something very exciting that's just started happening in the past year. We're doing this, and there's some other research groups around the country that are doing this. But the nanotechnology makes possible following the dynamic image and making a movie. And this will ultimately lead to perhaps a better understanding of mental illness, perhaps an understanding of learning and memory, how proteins move around as synapses are formed and people learn an event. And this will probably also play an important role in drug discovery. Okay, next. So now I want to get to the part of the talk that connects to global climate change. We have access to the world's most powerful electron microscope. Oak Ridge is just 2 hours and 15-minute drive going east on I-40. And they have a microscope there that has a probe size that's 0.7 angstroms. To benchmark you, a hydrogen atom is a half angstrom. So they've got a probe size that can see to very, very small distances. And we use this electron microscope. So the reason that we know that this is the shape of the crystal is because we can put it in the electron microscope and take a picture of it. So we were trying to do an experiment where not only were we going to get a picture of the structure of the nanocrystal, but we also wanted to look at the light coming out of the nanocrystal. We wanted the spectrum of the nanocrystal at the same time that we got the structure, and that'd be the first time that you simultaneously ever had structure and what does the light look like. Next slide. So there were two people doing this experiment. There's a graduate student, Mike Bowers, and a postdoctoral named James McBride. And James was trying to do the structure, what's the light coming out experiment. We didn't have any money to do that experiment. A lot of times you start an experiment, you don't have any money to do the experiment. So we had to kind of kludge things together. And in the laboratory, there was a photodetector to detect the light coming out, but it was only sensitive to blue light. Didn't see the rest of the colors of the spectrum. It only was sensitive to blue light. So James McBride told Mike Bowers to make very small nanocrystals, and I'm sorry I lied. There's actually 3 graphs in this spectrum. This is now the absorption spectra of the different nanocrystals. So here's the big ones, absorbing at low energy, absorbing red light, and then as you make them smaller, they're absorbing yellow and green light. This is the area that most people had worked on. James asked Mike Bowers to make a sample down here to try to make them so that they would give off blue light. The way the story goes is that Mike made some, and he gave them back to James, and James says, that's not small enough, I need them smaller. So Mike tried to make them smaller. He gave them to James, and James says, no, that's not small enough, good to make them smaller. Then Mike tried something really different, made them small enough, and James said, yeah, I think this will work. So Mike also runs the laser. We have a laser in our laboratory that can look at what's happening on very short time scales, on femtosecond time scales. And Mike thought, well, you know, I've never done an experiment with nanocrystals this small before, so let me put them in front of the laser and see what happens. And next slide. This is what happened. He was expecting that he would see blue nanocrystals. He was expecting that he would see blue light. He didn't see blue light. He saw this beautiful white light. That blue is from the laser. The laser is 400 nanometers, so the laser is blue light. This is a flow cell, and the nanocrystals are being flowed in front of the laser to keep the sample fresh. And he saw this really gorgeous white light. So this is the last spectrum that I'll show. Remember before, so here's 400 nanometers, and here's 700 nanometers. Remember before I showed you all those different sizes that gave peaks going from 400 to 700. Well, this material, these little baby nanocrystals, emit the entire visible spectrum. And it's almost as if it was done by intelligent design. It starts at 400 nanometers, which is where your eye turns on, and it stops at 700 nanometers where your eye turns off. Well, I had never seen a spectrum like this before in the literature, so I got excited about it, but then they showed me something else. Next slide. They had done some experiments in the lab. So here's those little nanocrystals in solution lit up by the laser, and they made a polymer film and lit it up by the laser, but this was really clever. They took a blue light-emitting diode, a blue LED, and there was some minwax lying around the lab. And they took the nanocrystals, dissolved it in the minwax, and they painted it onto the blue LED to make the white light LED. They demonstrated solid-state white light. They demonstrated solid-state white lighting. So why is that important? Next slide. What's the big picture? This is the big picture. This is NASA imagery, satellite imagery from NASA, taken at night. There's a lot of lights out there. With the exception of North Korea. North Korea doesn't get lights. And that little island there is South Korea. North Korea is missing. There's a lot of lights out there. You can see the lights in the picture, what you don't see in the lights, but you know are there, are the greenhouse gas emissions that go with providing that lighting. So next slide. So the thing of it is that we do and have done lighting tremendously inefficiently. The light bulbs that you have at home have a 5% power conversion efficiency. 95% of the electricity you use to turn on that light bulb gets wasted. Fluorescent lights are better, but fluorescent lights only have a 25% power conversion efficiency. So the goal is to go to solid-state lighting. You've all seen examples of solid-state lighting in the form of light-emitting diodes or LEDs. The taillights in cars are light-emitting diodes. If you drive around Nashville, if you look at the stoplights are all little pieces. The lights are pixels, and each of those pixels is a light-emitting diode. So the stoplights have red, green, and yellow light-emitting diodes. Hopefully, some of you graduating seniors have never seen this. Come up and look at this after the talk. So these are blue light-emitting diodes. It looks like something that you would take out of your computer. It's just a circuit board, but on the circuit board are the LEDs. So these things are inexpensive to fabricate. They have lifetimes of $100,000, maybe $200,000. They're virtually indestructible. This particular one, my father-in-law worked for a company that provided these lights for police cars. So you may have seen this in the blue lights in police cars now are all solid-state LEDs. And for those of you graduating, try not to see that between tonight and tomorrow. Problem is, it's very expensive and difficult to make them white. So have you seen like a bicycle headlamp or a flash key light, a white LED on a key chain or in a flashlight? If you ever take that and you project it against the wall, you'll notice that it's a very blue white light. So the way the white light LEDs are currently made is with a blue LED, and they put a yellow phosphor on it, and it gives a very unappealing blue light. Now it's perfectly fine for lighting a parking garage or for doing street lights, and there's towns like Raleigh, North Carolina, and Ann Arbor, Michigan that are converting all over to solid-state lighting. I forgot to mention that it's incredibly efficient. The roadmap for solid-state lighting calls for 90% efficient devices. So the reason that this discovery of the white light emitting nanocrystals was important is because it gives a very beautiful white light. Next slide. So if we could switch to solid-state lighting, this is some information from the Department of Energy. We could reduce the amount of electricity used for lighting 22%. In the United States, 22% of the electricity that we generate goes for lighting. We could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You could save a lot of money on electricity, and you could alleviate the need to build new power stations. So I lied. There's 4 graphs. Here's the spectrum of the white light nanocrystals. Here's the spectrum of the blue LED with the yellow phosphor. If you don't like fluorescent lights and you don't know why, it's because they're not broad spectrum white light. They have phosphors that give off a blue light, green light, and red light, and it tricks your eye into thinking that it's white light. This is what a light bulb looks like, and all of this is wasted, and then this is what sunlight looks like. Next slide. Next slide after that. So this one I've actually got a movie to show you how we make them. So could you activate that movie? So there's the solvent that we're going to make them in a little magnet stir bar. That's Mike Bauer's hand. He injects the reagents, and he counts 7 Mississippi. It's very technical. And he waits for a hint of yellow color, and then he puts in cold butanol, essentially cold alcohol, and the cold alcohol drops the temperature. Because we want to make them real small, we can't let them grow. So we got to drop that temperature really quick to make the small nanocrystals be the small nanocrystals. Okay, next slide. We use this microscope out at Oak Ridge National Lab to get pictures of them. These are 3.5 nanometer crystals to sort of guide your eye. And then here is a pair of the real tiny little baby ultra small nanocrystals. And I can show you this comparison here. So the microscope tells us that this is what the little baby nanocrystals look like. And here's the 6 nanometers. These guys, what we found is 1.7 nanometers down to 1.2 nanometers, so 12 to 17 angstroms emits the broad spectrum white light. And the big difference between this one and this one is if you look closely at this one, you can see that almost all the atoms are on the surface. And these white light emission properties are coming from the emission of surface states, from atoms that are on the surface. So this guy, you can tell the majority of the atoms are in the center, in the interior. This guy, most of the atoms are on the surface. Okay? So this is some lighting jargon. I was always worried when I prepared this talk that maybe there would be an illuminating engineer or an electrical engineer in the audience and know more about this than I do. But here's something called the chromaticity coordinates. And you take the light coming out of your material, and if it's 0.33, 0.33, it's perfect white. We're very close to perfect white. And we've been making devices. This is the first generation device, which was called in the press a glowing fuzzy Q-tip. Now we make something that we take these types of blue LEDs, and we found a good polymer, and we coat them with the white light nanocrystals. So now we actually make things that people don't laugh at. The blue white LEDs that I was telling you about, that you can pick up at the store, those have what's called a color rendering index of 76. 100 is perfect. Our devices have a color rendering index of 93. So the one thing we've really got going for us is that they give off very beautiful light. Tell you the one thing we haven't got going for us is that the devices that we make now aren't yet efficient enough. When we started this 3 years ago, they were 3% efficient. Then we got it to 10%. Now we've got it to 20%. But we still have a ways to go. Next one. We submitted one of the papers that we've done on this work, got the cover of a journal called Journal of Materials Chemistry. This is just to show you what you can do. So these are big brother and sister nanocrystals, and here's the little baby white light ones. This is coating a flask and lighting it up with an LED to show you what a light bulb might look like. And this is very clever. A student took one of the hobby spray paint cans that you can load with paint, and he took the nanocrystals and put it in hexane, and he put it into the paint can, and then he used a stencil, and he spray painted the nanocrystals through a stencil, and then he backlit it with a UV light to make this white light here. Where's my students? Students? So are rave parties still, do people do rave parties anymore? Okay, rave parties still exist. We have a market here. This could be this could be, before you go to the party, you get your nanocrystals and you spray paint them on, and whatever you want it to say, like "Go Vandy," or "I'm graduating tomorrow." So there's a future there. And so, summing up, so what's the big deal? Well, we discovered a material that by itself emits the entire visible spectrum. And nobody yet has been able to give me another example. So I don't know that this is the first time ever in the history of the world that there's one material that emits the entire visible spectrum, but nobody's been able to give me another example. So we've got a material that emits the visible spectrum. The other thing I'd like you to take home from today's lecture is that when you get down to the nanometer size regime, the properties of materials change. Okay, so you discover a new nanomaterial. It may have some terrific new property that can lead to a fantastic new application. So that's why nano is important. And then this message is a pitch, write your congressman. Mike Bowers was funded by the Department of Energy to do something different. than what we discovered. And James McBride was funded by the National Institutes of Health to do something different than what we funded, than what we were funded for, and different than what we found. So basic science is important. That funding can lead to serendipitous discoveries, and funding basic science is important. Next slide. So I'm going to show you a movie in a second. Mike Bowers became probably the most famous graduate student from Vanderbilt University. Mike and James were the one that did the white light work, and then some of the other LED work was done by Michael. The picture I showed you, the rave thing, the white light nanocrystal rave thing, was from Michael Schrader and John Gosnell. And I work with Steve Pennycook at Oak Ridge and Sharon in electrical engineering. And if you didn't understand any of this, I'm going to try again. I'm going to let the Fox News guys try. If you don't understand me, see if you understand the Fox News guy. Okay, we ready? Is the audio on the PC? Laptop. There. Let's see if this works.
Well, say goodbye to light bulbs. That may be a little premature, but it's coming. If research at Vanderbilt University goes anywhere, we may no longer need light bulbs to light our way. Scientists at Vandy are saying now that they've discovered a way to create white light with extremely tiny crystals and not a lot of money. Jonathan Seri with details.
Researchers at Vanderbilt University are reinventing the light bulb.
This is thrilling. Yeah,
Chemistry professor Sandra Rosenthal and graduate student Michael Bowers have applied to patent their next generation lamp. It uses solid-state light-emitting diodes, or LEDs. Already in use in home electronic appliances, LEDs last 50 times longer than conventional light bulbs and operate on roughly 1/10 of the energy.
With an increase in overall efficiency of the material, I could see the potential for a commercial product.
While most LEDs produce specific colors, Bowers discovered by accident that he could create broad-spectrum white light similar to a reading lamp when he coated the LED with a thin layer of microscopic crystals that can be produced in a lab in less than an hour.
But the holy grail really is to replace incandescent lighting and fluorescent lighting with much more efficient solid-state lighting.
Imagine if you could replace inefficient lights like these. The Department of Energy predicts the entire nation will transition to solid-state lighting, saving U.S. consumers an estimated $125 billion in electric bills over the next 20 years. Although they conserve energy, solid-state lights themselves are costly.
It's just like every other technology. It's always expensive when it's new, and the longer you do it, the better you get at it, the cheaper it becomes.
Don't throw out your reading lamp just yet. Researchers say it may still be several years before solid-state light bulbs go on sale at your local hardware store. But in the not-too-distant future, this technology may lighten our electric bills while lighting our homes. In Nashville, Tennessee, Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
That's it. Yeah.